So today we're going to work with exponents, and we just need to make sure we know what exponents are and what the parts of exponents are. So exponents are a raised number that are used to show repeated multiplication. When you see an exponent, it's like floating up high. And if I give you an example, it'll help out a little bit better. So an exponent is when you have a number, let's say 4. The exponent is the number that's floating up high. Let's say we have a 3 floating up there. The fancy word is superscript. It's written up high. 4 to the third power. The 3 is our exponent, and that 3 is the raised number that shows repeated multiplication. So what it means is I'm going to have the base, and that's our next vocab word, the base 4 written down 3 times. So 4 to the third power means 4 times 4 times 4. And then we can simplify that and get a real answer. So power, our next vocabulary word, power is a base number with an exponent. So this whole thing, 4 to the third, 4 with an exponent 3, this whole thing is considered a power. And then the base is the main number in the power. So in our example, 4 to the third power, the 4 is considered the base, the 3 is considered the exponent, and the whole thing is considered a power. Okay? So 4 with an exponent 3, we read it as 4 to the third power. Now once in a while you'll hear somebody say 4 cubed. The word cubed in math means to the third power. So take a minute, write down what you need to write down for definitions, exponents, power, and base. And as you're writing that down, since we're in algebra, not only will our exponents be on bases that are numbers, like 4 to the third power, but we could even have m to the third power. And that just means m times m times m. So exponents can be used with bases that are numbers. Exponents can be used with bases that are variables. And exponents can even be variables, but that's something we'll get to at another time. So when you hear the word first power, let's say somebody says 5 to the first power. That means 5 with an exponent of 1. Well, that just means there's 1 5. Well, 5 to the first power is just 5. We don't write to the first power very often because we don't need it. It's unnecessary. It'd be like saying, how old are you? Oh, I'm 13 to the first power years old. Well, that just means you're 13. So if you ever see or hear to the first power, it just means one of those bases. Now, sometimes you'll hear squared. Somebody says to you, 7 squared. 7 squared means 7 to the second power, which we know means 7 times 7, which you can simplify. And we've talked about this one, cubed. If you ever hear the word cubed, it means to the third power. So if you had, I don't know, let's go with 5 cubed, that means 5 to the third power, which means 5 times 5 times 5, which you could simplify into 125. So those are just a few things we got to know. If you ever hear first power, squared, and cubed, it's important to understand what they mean. So these 4 examples, you should have them written down in your notes. Please write these 4 down. Write them down exactly as you see them. Notice the first one has parentheses, the second does not. The third has parentheses, the fourth does not. Please write these down, and we're going to go through these 4 together. This is something that confuses students from 7th grade all the way through high school. And we really need to write this down and talk about it, and by writing it down, hopefully then you'll be able to refer back to it later. So the first one, notice the -4 is in parentheses. So it says -4 to the second power. That means I need 2 -4s. I need a -4 and another -4. And I'm going to multiply them. Well, thinking back to chapter 1, a negative times a negative is a positive. So -4 times -4 is positive 16. Now, if you look at the second example, it's a little different. Everything looks the same except there's no parentheses. When there are no parentheses, you need to think of the negative sign as the word opposite. So what we're saying is, I want the opposite of 4 squared. So my strategy for this, if there are no parentheses around the negative sign, I cover up the negative sign, or I pretend it's not there, and I do the work. I want 4 squared. Oh, 4 squared is 16. 4 times 4 is 16. But there's a negative that's not in parentheses, which means I want the opposite of 16, and the opposite of 16 is negative 16. So the strategy again, pretend there's no negative sign. Do the work. 4 squared is 16, but I want the opposite of 16. I want negative 16. So looking at the third one, the negative 3 is in parentheses, and it says to the third power. That means I need 3 of the negative 3's. I know negative 3 times negative 3, and negative times a negative becomes a positive, positive 9. Bring down the negative 3. Positive 9 times negative 3 is negative 27. 3 negatives, when I multiply them all together, I finish with a negative. The first one, way up here, I only had 2 negatives. When I multiply 2 negatives, I get a positive. The fourth one, the negative sign is not in parentheses. Remember, that means I want the opposite of everything. So pretend there's no negative sign there. In fact, you might even want to cross it out and say, oh, I need 3 to the third power. I need 3 times 3 times 3. I need 9 times 3, which is 27. But I actually need the opposite of that. So I get negative 27. So the first 2 examples, we got a positive 16 and then a negative 16. But the last 2 examples, we both got negative answers. And that's because in the third example, right here, we had 3 negatives. So the 3 negatives gave us a negative answer. I know those 4 can be confusing. Make sure you've written all 4 of them in your notes and what they mean so that you can refer back to them later. All right, let's do some easy ones. This says write the expression using an exponent. They don't want us to find the answer to negative 5, negative 5, and negative 5. They just want us to write it with an exponent. So the fast way to write that, negative 5, notice they're all in parentheses. To the third power, there are 3 of them. Now in the second one, notice we've got letters, numbers, all kinds of things. Well, first thing I notice, here's a negative 2, or the opposite of 2. And there's no other numbers, so I'm just going to keep negative 2. Next thing I notice, I'm going to multiply by some letters. Well, I notice there's an A here, another A here, and another A here. So that means I'm going to multiply by A to the third power. And there's only one B, so I'm going to say times B. Now some kids say, can I say B to the first power? You can say B to the first power. You don't need to, because we know that if there is one B here, that means B to the first power. So here are 3 on your paper. Stop the video, try all 3, come back and check in with me in a couple minutes. Hopefully you've had time to try all 3. Notice the directions say write using exponents. The directions don't say find the answer. So I have 3 6's, so I'm just going to say 6 to the third power, and I'm done. In the next one, I see a 4. No other numbers, so I keep the 4. Then I see a Y, but I see another Y, so that means Y to the second power. And then there's only one X, so that's times X, or X to the first power. Some kids like to put multiplication signs in there, that's fine. We also know that since this is multiplication, the commutative property says I could rearrange the order. So I could rewrite it as 4x y squared. Remember, x to the first power is the same as x. I could put multiplication symbols in there if I need to. This right here, 4, the constant, or the coefficient, then x, then y to the second power. This is the preferred way because the variables are in alphabetical order, but all 3 of these answers mean the same thing. And then in the third one, letter C, I see a base of negative 3, and I see a negative 3 in parentheses 4 times. So I need to write it like that. This example says a microscope can magnify a specimen 10 to the third times. They want to know how many times that is. Well, I know that means 10 written down 3 times. Use the base of 10 and write it 3 times. Now I got to multiply it out. I get 100 times 10. So my answer is 1,000. Letter A. Try that one. Simplify 7 squared. 7 squared means 7 times 7. And we should all know that 7 times 7 is 49. Letter B. Notice, letter B, It's basically telling you to do two different problems. First it says find this answer, then it says find this answer, and it says evaluate. We know evaluate means change the letter into a number. Oh, it tells us to change a into 2. So this example here, I have the negative sign not in parentheses. The a turns into a 2 raised to the 4th power. In this example here, I do have parentheses. The negative is in parentheses. The a changes into a 2, and I raise that to the 4th power. Pause the video, try both of them, stop back and check in a minute or two. All right, hopefully you've tried both of them. I know this first one right here. The negative is not in parentheses, so my strategy is cover it up. Pretend it's not there. Do all the work. 2 to the 4th power means 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. And I know grouping is a fast way to work with exponents. Grouping means take things that are the same and group them together. 2 times 2 is 4, and 2 times 2 is 4, and 4 times 4 is 16. I did all my work, I got 16, but I got to remember that back here, there was a negative sign under that mess, or not in parentheses, which means I need the opposite of all that. The opposite of 16 is negative 16. This example right here, the negative 2 is all in parentheses, so I need negative 2 as a base written down 4 times. Grouping. Negative 2 times negative 2 is 4, and a 4 again, and 4 times 4 is 16. So 2 different answers. Okay? The negative sign in parentheses makes a big difference. Order of operations from back in chapter 1. We know the first thing to look for is grouping symbols. Then look for exponents. Then multiply and divide left to right. Then add and subtract left to right. We can use that to simplify problems. Okay? In letter A here, parentheses first, grouping symbols first. 3 plus 2 is 5. That 5 has an exponent of 2 attached to it. The 4 is outside the parentheses. I did parentheses, now I do exponents. Exponents, 5 squared. 5 squared means 5 times 5. So I've got a 25 there. There is a 4 next to it. 4 times 25 is 100. All right, evaluate. Remember, evaluate means change the letters into numbers. I want to look at each one of these. First, it means negative 2 times x to the 3rd. So times x times x times x. 4y, I know means 4 times y. There's a plus sign right here. I'm going to bring that in along. Let's see. Negative 2 times x times x times x. Well, x times x times x, each x turns into a negative 2. So x to the 3rd is my exponent. I know that means x times x times x, which means negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. So I'm going to do all that first. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4 times negative 2 turns into a negative 8. And I still have this negative 2. The plus sign is here. Over here I have 4 times y. Well, y is 3. 4 times y is 12. So I did parentheses, I did exponents. Now I got to multiply and divide left to right. Negative 2 times negative 8, 16. Plus the 12 that I got over here gives me a final answer of 28. Try letter A, try letter B. Letter B can be kind of tough, so be careful. Remember, a squared actually means a times a. Do that first. Try both of these and then come back and check in. Okay, I'm going to go kind of fast now. Exponents are first. Well, parentheses are first. There's no work to do in these parentheses, so I'm going to do exponents. 5 squared I know is 25. More exponents here. Negative 3 to the 3rd means negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. I know that's a positive 9 times a negative 3, so this is a negative 27. Let's see. Parentheses, exponents, multiply and divide from left to right. 50 plus negative 128. When I add those together, I get negative 78 as an answer. And down here, a times a, negative 5 times negative 5 is positive 25. 3 times 25 plus 6. 75 plus 6 equals 81. 81.